Okay, great. Well, good to meet you all. We haven't met in person before. It's great to have a conversation with you. Thank you for agreeing to talk to me. Um, yes, so I'm starting a new series of conversations about Quakerism. As you know, I've been to the Future of Quakerism conference recently in October, and I thought I've been having such interesting conversations. It's good to maybe record some of them and think more deeply about these issues. So, would you like to introduce yourself first and say a bit about what your journey has been into Quakerism and perhaps a bit about your faith journey and what's led you to Quakers at this point?
Yeah. Um, right. I'm old Rappaport. My first meeting for worship was in 1974 when I was at that time I was working as a photographer and I was photographing a friend's wedding. He was an attender. Both he and his wife have since become members. It was the Lewis Meeting House and it was the summer of '74. It was a lovely day. I was very, very political at that time. I still am. But I lacked a spiritual background to my politics. And I'd come across Quakers in so much as on all the demos and things, there'd be these, I'm being really stereotypical here, but there were these people in suits and sort of, who are the straights in the suits? Oh, they're Quakers. Oh, right, okay, cool. So I felt a sort of a political affinity that I often met Quakers where I was. And then my friend Keith asked me to photograph his wedding. So I actually had a taste of Quakerism. And the takeaways were, firstly, that I really liked it that that the two parties made the same affirmations to each other. That appealed to my egalitarian streak. Lewis Meeting House has the small burial ground. Do you know it?
No, I don't know.
All right. It has a small burial ground in front of it, and that's a dozen or so very small Quaker headstones there. And when we were gathering outside afterwards, the children were playing leapfrog on the gravestones. And the elders were beaming at them. And I said, it's sort of, oh, they got their priorities right. So it sort of ticked three boxes: that we shared politics, there was an egalitarianism about it. And also, I felt there was they prioritised important things and didn't get tangled up over silly little things. But I didn't start attending for a few years after that, but I realised that by the sort of late 70s, 77, 78, I really, really needed a spiritual base. And Quakerism was unchristian enough for me to feel comfortable there. Yeah, I'm an abuse survivor, and the use of God the Father in so much Christian liturgy is a real can't do that. And I'd like everybody of my generation, or no, like a lot of people of my generation, I had explored a lot. This is a bizarre little sidetrack, but I was really, sorry, I'm just trying to click something. As a young teenager, I loved Mad Magazine. And through Mad Magazine, I discovered Jack Kerouac and the Beat Poets and Zen Buddhism. And Buddhism had a lot in it that I liked, except it wasn't quite English enough for me. But I did like the lack of a deity. I enjoyed the meditation as much as I could. I'm not good at meditation. I'm not good at Quaker silence. I'm far too buzzy a person for that. But it's good discipline. So I'd been in a few places on the way, and a lot of my friends had also wandered around Eastern spirituality as well. And I'll say by the late 70s, I was quite convinced that I needed something, and I tried Quakers. And it spoke to my condition. I was very, very comfortable with it. What was quite interesting was I sort of announced to all my friends that I was going to Quaker worship, and they go, yeah, what a surprise. They'd seen it coming much more than I had. What happened next? 79, some friends of mine were getting married in Cornwall, Mousehole, and I lived in East Sussex. So I took a fortnight off and I cycled down the south coast of Mousehole. Attended the wedding, didn't take the photographs, which was nice. And then coming back, I stopped off at Charney Manor.
Oh, yeah.
Where I can't remember the guy's name. He was the secretary for Outreach back in the 70s. Before Harvey Gilman, the one before that, if you see what I mean. And he was running a retreat for inquirers. Which I was really surprised, because I'd been going to worship for a year or two, and there was one guy there who'd gone on this inquirers gathering, having never been to a Quaker meeting for worship, which I found a surprising choice. And yeah, the weekend there, we went to Oxford meeting for worship. It confirmed that I was in the right place. And then came the 80s, and I spent a lot of the 80s getting arrested and bounced about by the police outside cruise missile bases and things like that. I was very active in the witness at Molesworth. I should say, during this period, and for a while afterwards, I was working in residential care for the elderly, which means that I was working quite a few weekends. And so it wasn't easy to be a regular attender. And the other thing was that answering an unasked question is, why didn't I apply for membership then, when I was in many ways very involved in the peace movement from a Quaker approach. But back in the 70s, early 80s, Quakerism was very Christian.
Mm.
much more so than it is now. And I, as explained earlier, do not feel comfortable with a lot of Christian language. And while I am very comfortable with Jesus' teachings, more so now than I was then, actually, I just the Christian language that was used by certainly some friends, I found difficult to slip into. And then in the late 80s, I moved to London. No, before that, I discovered shamanism.
Okay.
And I did some weird stuff, from which I learned positive lessons. I really got into Native American, especially Great Plains, Native American spirituality and symbolism. And I still have a very strong home there with their oratory. I never got into dressing up as an Indian, although I did do a few sweat lodges and things like that. But there are aspects of Native American spirituality, the Vision Quest, stuff like that, which is so sanitized by modern shamanism. And the concept of suffering to gain a blessing is something that's quietly ignored. There's you don't hurt much, but nevertheless, I got a lot out of it, and I came to Ealing meeting, which, and one of the things about London as opposed to rural meetings is that because meetings at the moment are quite close together, you can have a choice of meetings to go to.
Yeah.
I could go to Brentford, or I could go to Ealing, or I could go to Hammersmith. Ealing was the closest, but it was very much a universalist meeting, and the language was not overwhelmingly Christian. And I realised that I could be a Quaker without being a Christian. And I actually remember one guy there, Martin Grubb, who applied for membership. And the reason he applied for membership was that he wanted to show that you could be a Quaker and not believe in a God. Not where I am, but it was that sort of, but that an example of the breadth of belief within at Ealing meeting at that time. A lot of quite strong feminists for whom the traditional concept of an external deity didn't speak to their condition. Excuse me a second. Hiya! Edit. And so I applied and was accepted, and I was a very active Quaker. I was an overseer, I was clerk of premises, I served on a national working party. This was a response to the minute from Black and Mixed Race Friends back in about 1990, when they raised the issue of they're not being accepted. And the name of the group was something like the Working Group on addressing racism amongst Quakers. It wasn't about what can we do about all the nasty racism out there.
Yeah.
It was about looking at us. And we were not at all popular. I can't be a racist, I'm a Quaker.
Okay. These
Or
issues are coming back around again now, aren't they? These things are being talked about today.
yes, it's taken 20 something years.
Yeah.
I've been watching it gradually working through. What I was quite upset about in advance of BYM this year was that documents from that era are not available online.
Mm.
So I'd acquired copies of these and was distributing them to anybody who wanted to have a look at them, just to see our journey, because it is a very, very long journey.
Yeah.
And I still feel we're very much on that journey. But we, as I say, we weren't very popular.
What do you make of the current? There's a lot of focus at the moment, isn't there, on diversity, and that perhaps the self-criticism that we're not a very diverse society and that we need to do more to be welcoming and inclusive. What are your thoughts on that then?
One of the objections that came up back then was, I'm sure they're much more comfortable with their own people. And so are Quakers. You actually look at not a photograph from Frank's house of a group of Quakers, because it's like Noah's Ark, we'll have two of them, two of them, two of them, two of them. No, you look at your general group of Quakers and it's mostly middle-aged, middle-class people. A lot of grey hair, and mostly university educated, blah, 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 blah. Like does gather to like. And I think there's also an issue that the form of Quaker worship attracts a certain kind of person. So most Quakers are quite introverted, inward looking, and not very good at communicating and getting into conversations when new people turn up at meeting. And as I said last night, we were talking about conflict in meetings. There's a lot of people who are drawn to Quakers because they think that they can avoid getting involved in conflicts. It's not my experience.
I mean, do you think this is a problem? You just said like gathers to like. I mean, should we feel bad about that? I mean,
No.
I mean, if we are, let's just say we are 80% and we're middle class white and overeducated and is that a problem? Should we beat ourselves up about that?
No, I think we need to be self-aware of it. My biggest... No, I've got loads of them. One of my many criticisms of Quakers is that they see problems out there. So I went to a workshop 25 years ago at one of the residential yearly meetings about single parent families. And everybody saw single parents in terms of young mothers living in council tower blocks. And when I pointed out that at least 4 people in the group were single parents, it came as a shock. And one of the women came up to me afterwards and said, "Thank you all, I've never thought of myself as a single parent, but yes, I'm divorced and I'm raising my family, my children." And that applied to, as I say, to 4 people in that group. There is this tendency to see things out there. And I'm skipping about now. I mean, one of my big issues is antisemitism amongst Quakers. And
Why is that then? I mean, I don't quite understand what what the criticisms would be. Can you talk me through that?
of antisemitism,
Yeah.
first one is I can't be anti-Semitic. I'm a Quaker. That sort of tends to be the fallback. Seeing Jews as outside of the society rather than in, there are Jewish Quakers, and there are people like me for whom Jewish worship is a joy. In the same way as there are Quakers who really like singing, so they go to an Anglican church occasionally to sing their hearts out because they can't do it with Quakers.
Do you have Jewish heritage yourself then, Ol?
No, I'm a convert. A quick bit about that is that my late wife and I got together in the late 90s. She had been brought up by Holocaust survivors. And her mother had brought her up, "Don't ever tell anybody you're Jewish, it gets you killed." So she had got into New Age stuff, yoga, things like that. And then I bumble into her life I'm very comfortable with being a Quaker, and she came along to meeting for worship with me a couple of times and then just completely lost interest because she was a woman who enjoyed dressing up. She wore makeup, shaved her legs, and a lot of women dismissed her because of that at meeting. And we both desperately wanted a spiritual path that we could share. I don't think we realised at the time how much we wanted it until we found it. And coincidentally, one of the elders of Jewish heritage said, "My mum's having trouble with her computer. Oh, can you help her?" So I did. And Daphne and I got on terribly well together. And she wanted to pay me for my services, which I wouldn't accept. One, I didn't feel I'd done enough to earn any money. 2, I knew she was as poor as a synagogue now. So I said, "No, I tell you what, can I come to your synagogue sometime? I'd love to do that." "Oh yeah." So she said, "Why don't you come to Hanukkah? It's coming up soon." This would have been late 90s, early noughties. And must have been 98, 99. I was just getting involved with Leslie. And I said, "I'm going to the synagogue. Do you want to come with me?" And she said yes. So we went to the Liberal Synagogue, which is literally at the end of the road here. And it was wonderful. And we both really, really liked it. The rabbi was this wonderful lesbian woman with a gorgeous partner who sung wonderfully and was a proper rabbi. She could split her hair into 16 strands discussing it. And we felt really, really at home there. We I began to study to convert, but because of my dyslexia, I just couldn't do it. But we really felt at home there. And it was a place where Leslie and I could worship together, which was something we wanted to do.
Mm.
And for the next decade and a half, I suppose, most of my worship was at the synagogue with Leslie. And I was so part of the community that even though I wasn't Jewish, I was on the Rights and Practices Committee, a Quaker on the Rights and Practices Committee. You know, there's a mind bender for you. But and I occasionally get asked about my dual membership, and my answer is, there's two answers. One is I never feel more Quakerly than when I'm at the synagogue, and I never feel more Jewish than when I'm at a meeting for worship. And, you know, on Zoom, I will be singing parts of the Erev Shabbat service to myself, making sure I've got the microphone off, because that's the music that I worship in.
So currently at the moment, Ol, you're worshipping on a Sunday in Ealing meeting, are you? And then you
And on Friday
also
night,
go to the synagogue.
yeah, on Zoom. I mean, that's one of my current situation is that because I got long COVID, I'm very, very physically limited. But the synagogue has got a wonderful Zoom setup with an enormous screen in the synagogue. So when we have services in the synagogue, we are seen by the whole congregation very, very easily. And it's not just a computer, you know, a laptop computer on a shelf in the corner. You know, we are very, very visibly a part of it. And they got lots of cameras in the synagogue so that there's actually somebody operating the cameras, which is rather nice. So you get to see who's there, close-ups of the rabbi doing the readings and things like that. And I've got rather lost. What was the question?
Well, I'm intrigued by the dual membership because I think you know, obviously what I'm interested in, what is your perspective then on
Okay.
Quakerism?
I
I'm
feel like a
from
Jew and I think like a Quaker.
yeah. So
That's
you must have a, you know, almost a unique insight really into Quakers because you deeply are a part of Quakers and understand its processes and structures and organization. But you also have this outsider perspective on
Yeah,
it.
well, I mean, that was the thing that happened when Leslie and I started going to synagogue, that I discovered that there was this whole unmet side of me. A lot of people, when they come to Quakers, say it was like coming home. I don't mean to be too sarcastic when I say that, but I have never felt that sense, the sense of homecoming that they are describing. I feel very familiar in a Quaker environment, but I don't feel at home. Whereas after a couple of services at the synagogue, praying in a language that I didn't understand, that I could barely pronounce, I had a sense of belonging, of being home in a way that I never had. And for Leslie, it was a wonderful experience because she was finally, with me, able to engage with her heritage,
Mm.
which was a lack for her. It was always an unanswered question. and she was very, very happy at the synagogue and very, very happy dying a Jew. That was very important. Yeah. Well, it was so important the question never came up. It was just obvious, that her funeral would be at the same crematorium that her parents were cremated at, and the service was run by a rabbi.
Interesting, isn't it? Because it's in that time of death, preparing for our own funerals, I suppose. That is perhaps a time when you do have to choose which tradition you are feeling more a part of. I haven't.
I'm having a Jewish funeral.
Are you?
Oh yeah, that's absolutely no doubt for me. Um, I love, I really like the ritual. There's something about the Jewish liturgy, even the slightly sanitized liberal liturgy, that it's like a stone that's been polished for 3,000 years. And the words are so considered and well thought out. But yeah, those are the prayers that I want people saying when I die.
So in contrast to what you've just said there, then, I mean, 350 years of a Quaker tradition feels very young and
Yeah,
fresh, and in comparison to that. So, what do you make of Quakers currently? Then, I mean, what keeps you involved in Quakers? And what do you make of it? You said you had a number of criticisms. What's your assessment of Quakers at the moment?
I despair. I really do. I mean, one of the questions you've got is about declining and aging groups, and I think that applies to excuse me, that applies to a lot of organised religions. I mean, certainly, I have a rabbi who's a very close friend, and she is really despairing the future of liberal Judaism because the congregations are getting older and it's getting harder and harder. The young people who are coming aren't putting their shoulders to the plough.
But in Quakers, we heard the other week that we have about 10,000 Quakers in the UK, and the average age is around 60. And I think in the last few years, it's aged to 61 is the average. So it's a very slight declining overall numbers and a very slight aging. So it's not I don't think it's some kind of catastrophic doom that we're heading towards. But I mean, what's your assessment of it? You said you despair at Quakers. What?
Because it's so difficult to get, the elders and overseers are now a single group. It's very hard to get, certainly in West London, to find the people to serve
Yeah.
on the committees and the various groups and things.
And is
Yeah,
that
so
what makes
that's
you despair? That your despair is about a lack of younger generation than yourself to be able to fill these roles?
yeah, and also with reducing numbers, reducing income. And I don't know how long you've been involved with Quakers, but back in the early 90s, a yearly meeting had responded to a concern of young friends about the amount of capital that Britain Yearly Meeting had, that it was sitting there, and their sense was that it should be being used to make the world a better place. And so friends went on a spending spree in the late 80s, early 90s, And then suddenly the money started to run out. And it took a while for friends to realise that we had to balance the books. And it was all very well having all the, there was a periodical called Quaker Monthly, which was a little bit more thoughtful than The Friend, and was, I can't remember the names of the, because the committees have changed their names so much, but it was part of Outreach, and it's, nobody could work out how much it cost. And everybody who tried to work out came up with a different figure, how much it cost. And Quakers were really struggling with fiscal responsibility.
But in a spiritual sense, though, Al, does it matter if Quakerism dies out? I mean, does it matter if we lose meeting houses? Does it matter if we don't have the committees filled and the roles taken up?
Yes.
What do you despair about in that respect?
You need the committees filled to do the housework. Now, Quakers are very low on housework. They don't spend all that, polishing the brasses and things like that. These are not tasks. But our meeting houses up to now have been a way of supporting causes, communities that wouldn't have support if we weren't there with our meeting houses. They're an important contribution to society, and
if we didn't have that, I mean, if we didn't have Friend's House and we didn't have buildings, we didn't have meeting.
I mean, Friend's House, I think, is a different thing to the meeting houses. I think a stonking great lump of real estate in central London opposite Euston Station is a capital asset that could be doing a lot better work if central offices moved to somewhere more affordable.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be done in central London. Although, going back to what I was saying about the offices, the premises, there's a lot of groups that Friend's House provides meeting space for. Although, I mean, one of the questions I have about that is that I don't know how carefully Friends scrutinise the groups that they support. And I'll give you a nice non-controversial and very old example of that. I was watching Synod after it had voted to ordain women, which would have been back in the 90s anyway. And there was a group of people protesting, and the interviewer said, what are you going to do now? And the fight has only just started. We're meeting at the Quaker International Centre at 3 p.m. on whatever the date was. So I rang up Anne Wade, who was on a relevant committee, and I said, do you know that this group who are against the ordination of women are meeting at Quaker International Centre on Tiddlypom oh no, they're not, and it got sorted. But there are times when I think friends could add a little bit more rigour. I mean, certainly they've used meeting houses, they've allowed meeting houses to host Palestinian support meetings, which are actually Hamas mouthpieces. That's a terribly simplistic way of putting it. But, you know, I think if you're going to support groups, you have to apply diligence, or you do it on a completely commercial basis. And if the people have got the money to stump up, yes, please don't smoke in the building.
So is there a tendency, do you think, for Quakers to be censoring groups that they don't agree with? And you think that that's,
Well, yes, it
you
does
think
happen.
that's
I mean, there was an
justifiable and
example.
the right way to go?
Well, if we didn't have any premises, we wouldn't have that problem, would we? No, I think if part of your outreach is your premises, then you have to be as scrupulous in who you let use the meeting house and that they meet your criteria.
But
And
Quakers don't agree on our criteria very often, do we? I mean,
no,
do you think there's enough? Do you
that's,
think there is enough agreement? It's really interesting here you say that our buildings are a part of our outreach.
our ministry to the world. Yeah.
Mm.
There's a very good article by Keith Braithwaite in the last 2 or 3 years in The Friend. Do you want me to look it up and send it to you? About meeting houses. It's written from the perspective of some point in the future, 2030. Not why did we get rid of our meeting houses, but looking back on what happened when we got rid of our meeting houses.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. I need to write this down because I have short-term memory problems. Right.
You talked about despair then, Al, and one of the things that I want to kind of look at towards the end of these conversations is about hope for the future. But you've used the word despair.
Yeah,
Um,
I've always despaired about Quakers. I get so frustrated with Quakers. They're so quiet and timid. That's why I go to synagogue, where we talk and gossip and you eat too much.
I was at a conference recently with a load of Quakers and an even larger group of Catholics. And in the evening at the bar, the Catholics were all lining up to queue, and they were coming back to the tables with great big glasses of wine. And of course, the Quakers were sipping their water and going for some tea later. And
Yeah,
it's a very different type of culture, isn't it?
yes, it is. And I'm just going right back to an earlier bit about diversity, is there is a Quaker culture. And I get very frustrated with it, but it is Quakers' contribution to the world. Do you know Beth Allen?
Yeah.
Right, okay. Years ago, I'm going, because I've known her 30, 40 years. She has because she's got a very Anglican slanted perspective. She has some very interesting analogies, and one of them is God sitting there. There's a problem. I'll use the Quakers to sort that one out. I think the Catholics could deal with this. Yeah, and there's this uniqueness about Quakers, and I wish they realised it and were more confident about being Quakers rather than trying to be diverse,
Mm,
inclusive, tiddly-bom, which seems to be the fashion at the moment,
mm.
trend at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I have some reservations about it as well. I mean, over the years, I make a point of visiting various places of worship. And I remember going to a church in Leeds, a huge church, very large congregation, hundreds of people there. And it was predominantly a black congregation. And
Hmm.
I didn't feel any sense that they were particularly worried about that or thinking, oh, we're too black. We don't have enough white people coming to our church. So
Yeah.
I do wonder whether we take this diversity issue perhaps a little bit too in a narrow way. And I'm not
Well,
really sure if it's important or real.
going back to the my Noah's Ark analogy, where whenever Quakers publish photographs, they always want two young people, two people of colour, and it's just like Noah's Ark.
I see.
Um, I posted a vitriolic pair of photographs during yearly meeting, one of actually the people in yearly meeting, and then a photograph from the website of a group of Quakers, none of whom were over 50. I mean, it was just
Yeah, yeah.
so misleading.
The real picture is full of grey hair and
Exactly.
um, yeah. And then the corporate pictures are a different cohort entirely. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean,
Cohorts.
it occurred to me, when you look at these pictures and there's a sea of grey hairs of we really are a society of elders, and I mean, I for one, am not that keen on the fawning culture that we have towards youth and young
Yep,
people.
absolutely.
I don't particularly see that that has merit, and I
Well,
really value eldership, and I just think elders should be old.
yeah,
There's a great
I'm going
wisdom.
back to the point I made earlier. I'm sorry I'm barging in, but what I think it was a disaster for the finances of society back in the late 80s to to liquidate assets and spend them. That was a financial disaster. There's not many people about now who remember that.
No,
You'd have to be over 70 to really to remember that. And that's why I am very, very cautious about what I see as moves to give young friends an even stronger voice. I mean, God, when I was 30, I was dreadful. I had no sense of responsibility at all. That's the same when I was 40, come to think of it. No, I'm sorry. There was a point in my life, somewhere in my late 50s, and I realised that my thinking had changed.
mm,
And there was enough information in my head for me to be drawing conclusions. And one of the joys of my old age is that I have three friends who value my wisdom and perspective, and to whom I am a mentor.
mm,
And one is a local councillor, a very ambitious local councillor, I dare to say that one is my MP who really values my opinion and experience on things. Because I remember more than his advisors do, because they're younger people.
Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
know, and that long memory, which older people have,
Mm.
while it's still working, is very, very valuable.
Well, you see, the term elders in Quakers in the UK at the moment is really has been detached from people who are old. I mean, I was talking to a friend in our local meeting who is part of Kenya meeting,
Mm.
and I was asking her what what's the criteria for being an elder in Kenya, and she said, oh, it's about 70, about over 70. That's when you become an elder. And I really felt a sense of longing for that.
Yeah,
I'm not a fan of appointing younger and younger elders. I mean, I think there's ministers. I mean, I'm sure I know there's a hugely valuable ministry from young people, but I'm not convinced about eldership.
I when I first came to Ealing, there was a couple, Ronald and Caroline Howe. She was a Cadbury, who were absolute pillars of the meeting. And it was a very traditional. He was an elder. She was clerk of overseers. And I can still, I'm going back 30 plus years, remember some of his ministry. It really shaped me. I loved his ministry because he always started off with what the hell's he talking about sort of introduction line. They were beautifully crafted and always worth listening to. And there used to be a bench in the garden which was known as Ronald's bench, which, if you saw Ronald talking to somebody on the bench, you knew they were being eldered. Glorious days. No, one of the things that I've learned through my life of working with the frail elderly, when I was in my late teens, I was looking after survivors of the First World War, so I have a sort of a memory that goes back over a century in a way.
Yeah.
And I realise that every generation has absolutely unique qualities that are so precious. I've seen in the people that I care for, when I first started working with the frail elderly, I was caring for people who had been educated till they were 11, 13. Some could barely write a sentence. They could sign their name. That was it. They spoke beautifully. They really had this wonderful oral descriptive capacity. And I used to sit and I would just listen to them telling me the most boring stories just for the sheer beauty of the way they spoke. When you get onto universal education, and you get working people who've been educated by middle class people who think that that's the proper way to speak.
Mm-hmm.
You listen to trade unionists at this moment in time. You mean now? That, yeah, sorry. This is another one. I can rant about anything. Give me
I was
3 minutes
really interested
preparation.
in what you were just saying about the generations being unique, and a lot of these podcasts actually are held by, hosted by young friends because, of course, they're using these new technologies perhaps more than us.
Hmm.
And I think they listen to these kinds of podcasts more as well. I mean, you're still saying that you're despairing about
Yeah.
Quakers rather than hopeful. But I mean, do you have any thoughts to offer young friends today, young people interested in Quakers today?
Shut up and listen. No, And yeah, I'll sit with that. I think we don't listen enough. And I spent a lot of I'm doing all the talking now because I'm old. But when I was younger, I listened to people and I just loved listening to them. I loved listening to their stories, the rhythm of their speech. I was very, very lucky when I was in my last years at school. I worked in a flour mill at weekends, and it was a very valuable lesson. I was just about to do my A-levels, and I was working with people who had had minimal education, but they were wise, they were knowledgeable. It's just they hadn't been educated in school. And that was for me, an important lesson to learn.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean,
And their courtesy. Oh,
yeah. I mean, I think, words of wisdom from all today, shut up and listen. I mean, I think it's not just for young people, I think that we can all learn from that. I think it's one of the things that I credit Quakerism in my life for. I'm a much better listener now than I ever used to be. Because the practice does help us develop that skill. Um, so any hope for the future then, all?
um,
For the future of Quakers?
right, okay, I'll give you, yes, here's a hopeful example. 2 years ago, pretty well, yeah, I wrote an article suggesting that antisemitism, unconscious antisemitism, was rife in the Religious Society of Friends. And I got pilloried for it.
Yeah.
But I also got some wonderful. This was my problem. The letters column of the Friend was full of people saying, "What's this Rappaport talking about?" But I was getting little messages. "You're absolutely right, Friend. Thank you for saying it." And I'm thinking, I wish you'd say it out loud, but thank you for telling me. And some of those people, I still can't reveal who they are, were people of weight. And I spent the next 2 years being a broken record and just saying, no, look at the numbers, look at all the letters about Palestine, where are the letters about the Rohingya and the Uyghurs? Now, why are you fixed on that and not other and nothing else?
Yeah.
Because of the database that I used, I could only go, when I did a search in the Friend, I could only get 100 results. With the new website, I can, if there's a cap, I haven't met it yet. But whereas I've had 100 letters about Palestine, 5 about the Uyghurs and 3 about the Rohingya.
I see. So you're doing an analysis, are you, yourself?
Yes, oh yeah, I always back stuff up with quantifiable, right? Last time I looked, there were 445 letters criticising Israel and Palestine. No, there were 445 letters about Palestine, and over half were critical of Israel. And since the October the 7th pogrom, some of the stuff that comes out of Friend's house has me absolutely screaming and feeling like I'm going to leave. The most recent one about the ICJ, I'm really, really raging about it, but I have a clear thing that I can my words will be heard better as a friend than as somebody outside. And I can live with it, so I do. Long rambling story, get to the chase all. Right, central offices have now finally got round to accepting that racism is not just about colour. But anti-Semitism is a form of racism.
Mm.
Worship, Witness and Worship, or the other way round, are currently producing a leaflet for Quakers about anti-Semitism. Woodbrook is looking at doing courses on racism, including anti-Semitism. So, you know, and I'm not taking full credit for that,
Yeah.
but I've been one of the most irritating people on that issue.
Yeah.
You know, oh God, here comes all. Let's hide.
So I hear what you're saying there, that there's some, differences of perspective and differences of opinion, differences of priority sometimes within Quakers. And we're not always that good, I think, at allowing those quieter voices or fewer voices to be heard. And I sometimes feel like there's a kind of there's a right way to think,
Oh,
sometimes.
absolutely. I mean, Quakers are so. I'm in dispute with the Quaker social media moderators, and I'm in the middle of a very drawn out complaint that's being resolved. That is in the process of being resolved, I hope. And I don't think the way that Friends House thinks I should think, which is quite an achievement for a non-creedal religion.
I mean, it's an astonishing statement, isn't it? I
Yeah,
don't think the way that Friend's House thinks I should think, I think is what
yeah,
you just said. Um,
that's a very good summary.
yeah. I mean, that's an astonishing statement, though, isn't it?
Mm.
That some central bureaucratic function um,
That should serve
has has
the
a, at
worshipping
least you have that
community.
impression anyway. You have that impression. You believe that they think you have the wrong opinions.
Yeah, yeah, I'm a hate-filled transphobe.
You're a hate-filled transphobe.
Sorry, bigoted transphobe.
Bigoted. That's what you've been called.
In the friend,
What in letters, you mean? You've been
in
called.
the comments on letters, so it's only if you're a digital subscriber.
And how is that managed, do you think, within?
Oh, I had my comments deleted.
And were they, I mean, on reflection, were your comments
I
hate-filled?
call myself a biological realist, but because I say things which the problem now is how much longer have we got?
Well, we'll be wrapping up soon. Go on, give me a short version.
I'll try and be brief. One of the current situation is the interpretation of minute 31 from Britain Yearly Meeting in 2021 is that we must provide a welcoming environment to trans and gender fluid people. So if somebody says something that somebody in central offices thinks is not welcoming or might make a trans or gender binary person, gender fluid person uncomfortable, then it gets stamped on. And it's positively, it's not Orwellian, it's Kafkaesque. I mean, I had this situation, you may want to edit this bit,
Well,
where
try to be
I,
careful. Try to be careful so we don't have to edit it.
no, well, it's up to you. I will stand by this. I had a message from the moderators telling me that my comment had been deleted. That was obvious. And I'd been issued with a warning. So I said, what's the warning about? You're going to tell the elders about me?
Yeah.
I almost word perfect what I said. And if I have had a warning, how long does it last? And I didn't get a reply. So my next letter was to the deputy recording clerk who answered on behalf of the moderators. And I said, what about this warning? You know, how long does it last? What are its terms? What am I being threatened with?
Mm.
And basically it's that if I do whatever they perceive as me having done wrong again, I'll be blocked from Quaker social media.
So this has got
I'm
to
sorry, no, the
feel,
most important thing about it, there is no expiry. That is a permanent warning.
yeah. So this is not from your local meeting. This is about the Facebook, social media. I think it's
Moderators,
specifically
yeah,
the Quaker Space page you're talking about,
yeah,
group maybe. Um, so it's a permanent warning.
a permanent warning. And I have that in writing from the deputy recording clerk.
Mhm. And what do you think of these processes then?
I think that's,
You keep talking about central offices, like,
yeah, well, that's what it
thing.
used to be called when I first joined.
Oh, I see.
Friends House were our central offices.
I see.
Before that, it was Devonshire House were the central
Oh, I see.
offices.
Yeah, I see. Yeah.
It's a non-hierarchical description. That's why I cling to it.
Yeah, I see. But there's still, when you say it's non-hierarchical, you've been told off by them and you've been written
No,
by them.
my use of the word central offices is non-hierarchical.
Yeah. But you're not experiencing them as a non-hierarchical structure.
Absolutely not, and it's getting worse.
Is this part of where your despair comes from then? Oh, this,
The centralisation, the issuing of statements that have not been tested by our discipline. I mean, quick summary. One of the big problems with Quakers is that we have structures that were developed in the day of when post went by carriage, horse-drawn carriage.
yeah,
And we considered things. So I've got this lovely line of Rufus Jones when he was talking about how they considered vices and queries, and he said, and it was considered weightily. And I could just imagine that, you know, a lot of friends rolling up their spiritual sleeves to ponder something ponderously. Yeah, a lot of our structures developed 350 years ago.
yeah,
When I joined, when I first started attending, most houses had a single telephone in them in the hallway,
yeah, yeah.
and we relied on Royal Mail. And even that was a little bit too quick. Whereas now we have we live in a society where people have there's a pressure on people to respond to things instantaneously or immediately, perhaps it's slightly better. So something awful happens. What's your response? Microphone in your face.
Yeah.
I need to think about it. I need to sit with this. We don't sit with things. And Friend's House has these knee-jerk cut and paste reactions. So we had this bizarre situation where the recording clerk was describing gender as, I can't remember the exact, a gift of God or a sacred gift or something like that, because it was a term that had been used by some other committee at some point, hadn't been considered. And when it was challenged, it was actually withdrawn. And you will no longer find that phrase in the context that it was issued in.
I mean,
there is this.
This is partly why I wanted to do these kind of longer interviews, you know, to try to ponder these issues, you know, in a relaxed way rather than trying to rush them. I mean, I think some of our conversations at meeting, you know, afterwards over tea and coffee or something, they're quite rushed, you know. We don't often have time to just really sit and ponder and talk these things, these issues through. And I really value what you've said today, because I do like to hear from especially older people, actually. But I
I
like to hear
forgive you.
people at length, you know.
Yeah,
And I for one don't I don't know, focus on young people as being the source of all wisdom. You know, I really think there's a benefit. I know for myself, much as like what you just said, in my 20s, I was quite the idiot, you know.
oh God, yes. There's a lovely, and one of the things I really like about being, this sounds a bit, about having long COVID, is I don't get about much. I have time to sit and think. Now, I have been accused of overthinking
Yeah,
when I'm being critical of people,
yeah.
but there's a lovely description of William Penn, who had dementia in his later years.
Okay.
And I'm going to send it to you. It's in Quaker Faith and Practice. But they describe that his confusional state actually releases him from everyday cares.
Yeah, yeah.
So he can ponder on the eternal. And I understand that, you know, now I've got time to think about it. I don't spend all my time doing Lego. But I do use Lego as a meditational exercise. Caroline, I mentioned Caroline and Ron Howe earlier, who were elders and overseers at Ealing Meeting. And in her last years, Caroline did have quite bad dementia. And because I've worked with frail elderly, especially women, all my life, I just found her very easy to befriend, to be with, whereas some people were slightly threatened by her confusion. I worked with it. And we had an enormous mutual affection for each other and a great respect that, although she saw me, believe it or not, this was 30 years, about 25, 20 years ago, as the younger up and coming generation of friends. You know, she would defer to my knowledge of Quaker faith and practice, but I would defer to her knowledge of Christian faith and practice.
Okay.
And a very quick anecdote, her family cleared her flat out and gave the meeting all her books, and there was her copy of Christian Faith and Practice held together with brown parcel tape.
Yeah.
And I said, well, doesn't Caroline want this? Oh no, she wouldn't, and her family said, oh, she wouldn't understand it. So I took it and I went to the old people's home with it. And her heart leapt like a salmon when she saw it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And my copy of Quaker Faith and Practice looks like it's been through a tumble dryer, it's so bruised and battered. And I will not accept. It's the first edition. All these revisions, puff, who needs them?
Yeah. Yeah.
That is that's what I stand with.
But I mean, this is the thing, you see, although you talk about the despair and the criticisms you have, and you're still here being a Quaker and
Yeah,
involved and caring enough to be arguing with central
yeah,
offices.
it's what I do. I've always been like this. I've done it differently. When Leslie introduced me, I wasn't even 50 when we first met, and she introduced me to her sister, who was a convert to Christianity, by the way. And Leslie said, "This is all. Show him some railings, and he'll chain himself to them." And in a way, I'm still doing that
Yeah.
differently, but there's still that obstructive
Yeah. Well, I think we're
quality.
blessed with many kind of difficult and protesting types like yourself also. Thank you so much for talking to me and being part of
It's been a joy.
yeah, yeah,
Thank you.
yeah,
Thank
yeah.
you for listening to me.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.